I never imagined that my parents, who always adored my brilliant sister Sandy, would one day tell me I was no longer needed. "One child is enough," they said. "We don't need a failure like you." Sandy needed a lot of money to develop her talents, and they made it clear. If I couldn't pay $1,000 a month in rent, I had no place in their home. I was still young when they decided to kick me out. It felt like the ground beneath me had crumbled, and I was free falling into an unknown, terrifying abyss. I had always known I was not their favorite, but being discarded so easily shattered something inside me. As I stood outside the locked door of what was once my home, the chill of the evening wind reminded me that I was now truly alone. Where would I go? Who would care if I vanished into the night? My parents didn't look back, and I realized I meant nothing to them. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for me. My uncle was the one who reached out. Despite his own hardships, he offered to take me in. "Emily, if you don't mind, I'd really like to be your parent," he said. Without hesitation, I accepted his offer, and that's how my story truly began. My uncle's words felt like a lifeline, pulling me from the dark waters of despair. He had always been kind to me, even when my father treated him like an inconvenience. I knew he didn't have much, barely enough to get by, actually, but the warmth in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. I packed the few belongings I had managed to keep, and my uncle took me to his small, one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't much, but it was filled with something I had never known at home: love. He gave me the bed, insisting he would sleep on the old lumpy couch, and made me a warm meal that night. As I ate, the knot in my stomach began to loosen. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. I was born into a typical household. My father worked a salaried job, and my mother stayed at home. We lived in my grandparents' house along with my unmarried uncle, who had always been frail and unable to maintain a stable job. My father treated my uncle terribly when my grandparents weren't around. He would call him a burden, yelling at him until my uncle would just look down in sadness. As a child, I couldn't understand why my uncle never stood up for himself. He would simply say, "Because I'm receiving support from them, Emily." I didn't fully grasp it then, but it always made me uncomfortable. I remember the way my uncle's eyes would shift to the floor whenever my father berated him, full of quiet resignation, like he had accepted that he would always be less than. It made me angry, even if I didn't have the words to express it. My uncle was kind, gentle, and never raised his voice, even when he had every right to. I often wished I could shield him from my father's cruelty, but I was just a child, powerless and scared. The only solace was the time we spent together when my father wasn't around, reading stories, playing games, and dreaming about a different life. Life changed drastically when I was 6. My grandparents died suddenly in an accident, and the peaceful atmosphere in our home shattered. My father's true colors emerged. He laughed at their passing, clearly pleased with the freedom it brought him. My uncle, on the other hand, was devastated. His only source of support was gone, and my father became crueler than ever. I remember standing in the living room, watching my father's expression as he received the news. There was no grief, no sadness, only a cold, calculating glint in his eyes. My uncle wept silently in his room, and I could hear the muffled sobs through the thin walls. The house that had once felt lively and full of love had turned into a hollow, echoing shell. My father took full control, and the little kindness he had shown my uncle disappeared entirely. My uncle became a target for all of my father's frustrations, and I watched helplessly as the man who had always been my quiet protector was slowly broken down. My father forced my uncle to give up his share of the inheritance, mocking him daily, calling him useless. 3 months later, he kicked my uncle out. I tried to hold on to my uncle, begging him not to leave, He looked at me with sad but kind eyes and said, "Don't worry, Emily. You're strong. You'll be okay without me." And just like that, he was gone. I cried myself to sleep that night, clutching the small stuffed bear my uncle had given me years ago. The house felt emptier without him. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the air was heavy with a silence that suffocated me. My father didn't bother to hide his satisfaction. He had gotten what he wanted, full control, without any obstacles. I felt abandoned, not just by my uncle, but by the universe itself. I was too young to understand why life was so unfair, why the people I loved kept getting taken away from me. But deep down, I knew I had to hold on. I had to survive, if only to honor the love my uncle had given me. After my uncle left, my life only got worse. My sister Sandy, at just 6 years old, was declared a genius. My parents poured everything into her: tutors, entrance exams, the best of everything. Meanwhile, I was left with nothing. I did all the chores, received hand-me-downs, and was constantly reminded that I wasn't good enough. "Why can't you be more like Sandy?" they would say, even when I did well in school. No praise, no acknowledgement, just endless comparisons. It felt like I was invisible, my achievements meaningless in the shadow of Sandy's brilliance. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while I was just there. My mother's eyes would light up when she talked about Sandy's accomplishments, and my father would boast about her to anyone who would listen. But when it came to me, they had nothing but criticism. I learned to stay quiet, to make myself small, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they would notice me if I was perfect enough. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. By the time I was 10, my parents decided they only needed one child. "If you can't pay rent, you have to leave," they told me, giving me a small amount of money before throwing me out. I cried, banging on the door, but they ignored me. With nowhere else to go, I went to my uncle's apartment. When he opened the door, he looked shocked, but his face quickly softened and he invited me in. The warmth of his embrace broke the dam of tears I had been holding back, and I sobbed into his chest, all the fear and loneliness pouring out of me. My uncle held me, his voice gentle as he whispered, "You're safe now, Emily." That night, he made me a simple dinner, and we sat together at his small kitchen table, the dim light casting shadows on the walls. It wasn't much, but it was more than I had ever felt at home. A sense of belonging, of being wanted. My uncle didn't have much, but he shared everything he had with me. He gave me his bed and slept on the couch, and every morning he would make me breakfast before I went to school. It wasn't an easy life, but for the first time I felt like I had a home. Hearing what happened, my uncle was furious, but instead of scolding me, he placed his hand on my head and said, "It must have been hard, but don't worry anymore. I'm here." Though my uncle was poor and often sick, I felt safer with him than I ever had at home. He offered to be my foster parent, and I immediately agreed. From that day on, I finally had a home filled with warmth. The days that followed were difficult, but they were also filled with moments of joy, small, precious moments that I clung to. My uncle would help me with my homework, his frail voice full of patience as he explained things I didn't understand. He would tell me stories about his childhood, about the dreams he once had, and I could see the spark of the person he used to be before life had worn him down. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. Slowly, I began to heal. The wounds left by my parents' cruelty started to fade, replaced by the love and kindness my uncle gave me every day. Life with my uncle wasn't easy. Money was tight, and his health was fragile. But we had each other, and that was enough. He always encouraged me, praised my efforts, and supported me unconditionally. Over time, I began to forget the pain of my parents' neglect. I focused on my studies, worked hard, and grew stronger, knowing my uncle believed in me. His belief in me became the foundation on which I built my confidence. I wanted to make him proud, to show him that his sacrifices weren't in vain. I threw myself into my schoolwork, spending long hours studying and doing my best to excel. My uncle would always be there, cheering me on, even when he was too weak to leave the apartment. He never missed a chance to tell me how proud he was of me, and those words became my motivation. I wasn't just doing this for myself, I was doing it for him, for the man who had given up everything to give me a chance at a better life. As I entered high school, I started to excel academically. My uncle, despite his health struggles, always attended school events, cheering me on. I remember the day I won an award for academic excellence. My uncle, with tears in his eyes, hugged me and said, "I'm so proud of you, Emily." Those words meant everything to me. They were the words I had longed to hear from my parents but never did. Standing on that stage, looking out at the small crowd, I saw my uncle's face, beaming with pride. It was a moment I would never forget, a moment that made all the hardships worthwhile. I knew then that I could face anything, as long as I had him by my side. My classmates often asked me about the older man who came to all my events, and I would proudly tell them, "That's my uncle. He's my family." They didn't know the full story, but they didn't need to. All they needed to know was that my uncle was the reason I was standing there, the reason I was succeeding. The years went by, and I worked hard, eventually earning a scholarship to a prestigious university. My uncle's pride in me never wavered. He supported me through every challenge, even when his own health took a turn for the worse. I remember spending nights at the hospital, holding his hand, reassuring him that I would be okay. He was more than an uncle. He was my true parent, my rock. There were times when I feared losing him, when the thought of him not being there anymore felt like too much to bear. But my uncle was strong in his own way, and he fought through every illness, determined to see me succeed. He would smile at me, even in the hospital bed, and say, "Don't worry about me, Emily. Just focus on your studies." And I did. I studied harder, knowing that I needed to make the most of the opportunities he had fought so hard to give me. My uncle's strength became my own, and I vowed to make him proud. After graduating from university, I got a job at a reputable company. My uncle's health had improved slightly, and we moved into a slightly better apartment. It wasn't much, but it was home. We were content. I focused on my career, and my uncle continued to support me in every way he could, always encouraging me to reach for my dreams. Our new apartment was small but cozy, and it felt like a fresh start for both of us. I decorated it with little things that made it feel like ours, photos of us together, small plants that my uncle loved to tend to, and a bookshelf filled with all the stories we had read together over the years. It was a place filled with love, a sanctuary away from all the pain of the past. My job kept me busy, but I always made time for my uncle. We would have dinner together every night, talking about our days, and he would listen with genuine interest, his eyes lighting up as I shared my successes. He had given me so much, and now it was my turn to give back to him. One day, when I was 25, I met someone special. His name was David, and he was kind, compassionate, and understanding. When I introduced him to my uncle, they got along immediately. My uncle, who had always been protective of me, approved of David, and that meant the world to me. Slowly, my life started to take shape in a way I had never imagined, filled with love, hope, and a future I could look forward to. David was everything I had ever hoped for in a partner: gentle, patient, and supportive. He understood my past, the struggles I had faced, and he admired the strength I had gained from it. My uncle took to David right away, and I could see the relief in his eyes, knowing that I had found someone who would take care of me, someone who would love me the way I deserved. David would often come over for dinner, and the three of us would sit together, laughing and sharing stories. It felt like a family, a real family, something I had always dreamed of but never thought I would have. David and I got married a few years later. It was a small ceremony, but it was perfect. My uncle walked me down the aisle, his frail hand holding mine, his eyes filled with pride and joy. It was one of the happiest days of my life. I knew my uncle had sacrificed so much for me, and I was determined to make sure he was taken care of for the rest of his life. As we stood at the altar, I looked at David and then at my uncle, and I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I had come so far from the scared little girl who had been thrown out of her home. Now, I was surrounded by love, by people who truly cared about me. My uncle gave a small speech at the reception, his voice trembling with emotion as he spoke about how proud he was of me, how much he loved me. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, and I knew that I was the luckiest person in the world to have him by my side. Life continued to be kind to us. David and I welcomed our first child, a beautiful baby girl, and we named her Grace, after the grace my uncle had shown me throughout my life. My uncle was overjoyed, and seeing him hold Grace for the first time brought tears to my eyes. He had been my savior, my guardian, and now he was a loving great uncle to my daughter. Grace's laughter filled our home, and my uncle would spend hours with her, reading her stories, just like he had once done with me. Watching them together, I felt a sense of completeness, as if all the broken pieces of my past had finally come together to form something beautiful. My uncle's health improved with the joy that Grace brought into his life, and I could see a renewed sense of purpose in him. He was no longer just surviving. He was living, truly living, surrounded by the family he had always deserved. 20 years later, I was 30 and thriving. My parents, however, had lost everything: their money, their jobs, even Sandy, who had finally escaped their grasp. One day they showed up at my uncle's old apartment, begging for my help. They wanted me to take care of them now that they had no one else. I looked at them, these people who had abandoned me, and I felt nothing. They were older, worn down, and desperate. "Thank you for abandoning me," I said, my voice calm. "Because of you, I found real happiness." My uncle stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder offering silent support. I turned away from my parents, walking back into the apartment, leaving them in the past where they belonged. It was a moment of closure, a moment that I had been waiting for my entire life. I had spent so many years wondering why I wasn't enough for them, why they couldn't love me the way they loved Sandy. But now, standing there, I realized that it didn't matter. I had found love, I had found a family, and I had found myself. And that was more than enough. Today, I live overseas with David, our children, and my uncle, who's healthier than ever. We moved for David's job, and it turned out to be the best decision for all of us. My uncle loves the new environment. It's warmer, quieter, and perfect for his health. He spends his days gardening and playing with Grace and her younger brother, Ethan. He smiles more now, and there's a lightness to him that I hadn't seen before. Our home is filled with laughter, with the sound of children playing, and the warmth of a family that has been through so much but has come out stronger on the other side. My uncle's garden is his pride and joy, and he spends hours tending to it, teaching Grace and Ethan about the different plants and flowers. It's a simple life, but it's a happy one, and that's all I've ever wanted. My sister, Sandy, is finally free, and we're rebuilding our relationship, away from the toxic shadow of our parents. She reached out to me a few years ago, apologizing for everything. She had been as much a victim of our parents' pressure as I had been. It took time, but we forgave each other and started fresh. Now she visits us often, and the kids adore their Aunt Sandy. She's different now, more relaxed, more at peace. She's found her own path, away from the expectations that had once weighed her down. We talk for hours, reminiscing about the past, about the dreams we once had, and the lives we've built for ourselves. It's a relationship I never thought I would have, but now that I do, I cherish it. We've both come so far, and we've both learned that true happiness comes from within, not from the approval of others. Life isn't perfect, but it's ours, filled with love, laughter, and hope for the future. My uncle, the man who saved me when no one else would, is finally living the peaceful life he deserves. And as for me, I've learned that family isn't about blood. It's about love, sacrifice, and the people who stand by you when the world turns its back. My story began with rejection, but it's ending in a way I never dared to dream, surrounded by those who truly care, and finally at peace. I look at my children, at my husband, at my uncle, and I know that I am exactly where I am meant to be. The pain of the past has faded, replaced by the warmth of the present and the hope of the future. And as I watch my uncle, now in his twilight years, smile as he watches Grace and Ethan play in the garden, I know that everything we went through was worth it. We are a family, bound not by blood, but by the love we chose to give each other, and that is the greatest gift of all.